Okay, welcome to session 20, part E. So in this one, I'm going to do a few of the homework problems at the back of the chapter, chapter 13. In particular, I'm going to do questions 1, 2, 4, and 10. Okay, so I encourage you to try to do those on your own. Right now, hit the pause button, do those. Okay, assume you're back. Here are the answers. Okay, question 1. What is the difference between a final good and an intermediate good? What's the difference between a finished good and a final good? Okay. Um, an intermediate good is a good that is used in the production to make another good. Okay. A final good, it's a good that's not used to make another good. Okay. It is the production is stopped after it is made. Okay. What is the difference between a finished good and a final good? Finished good is just a final good that's been sold to a consumer. Okay, so that's it. That's number one. Okay, next, consider the following. Let me show you this. Number 2. Okay, consider the following situations. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I'll read them now. Okay, an American citizen is hired to work on a pipeline in Iraq. How does this affect U.S. GDP? How does it affect Iraqi GDP? So let's assume that that citizen was working in within the borders of the United States, switched jobs, went to Iraq. So part A, 2A. So what happens is U.S. GDP goes down because that person was working within the borders of the U.S. No longer, whatever he was doing within the borders, GDP goes down by that amount. Iraq GDP goes up by whatever he produces, by the value he creates, by the money he earns once he's in Iraq. The Iraq GDP will go up by that amount. By the way, what if I'd asked the opposite? So what if I'd asked by how much does U.S. GNP increase or decrease? The answer is nothing. Well, assuming he makes the same amount of money in his new job as he did in the old job, okay, GNP doesn't change at all because he's still the citizen. GNP we just look at the total amount produced by U.S. citizens. How does it affect Iraq GNP? Same thing. Okay, it would not affect it at all. Okay, part B. A professor from France. Here to what? I'll put it up. A professor from France is hired this year to teach French at an Ivy College in the U.S. What happens to U.S. GDP? What happens to the GDP of France? Okay, so GDP is what's produced within the U.S. borders. So this is a French citizen, but U.S. GDP will increase. To B, U.S. GDP increases. French GDP decreases, assuming he had a job in France, and so he's no longer working at that job. What happens to the GDP of France? Okay. Okay, part C. Americans pay $30 billion a year in healthcare costs associated with smoking. How would those expenditures affect GDP? Okay. We're going to talk more about this in session 21, but I'll go ahead and give the answer now. And actually, I don't think you'd quite be expected to know that until we get to session 21. But here's the answer. The answer is GDP is calculated by what people spend, okay, in the economy. So the idea behind that question is if all of a sudden people start smoking, which causes them to have to buy more health care, have to go to the hospital more, pay doctors more, and so on. They're actually spending more money. Compared, say last year they weren't smoking at all. This year they are. Healthcare costs go up. GDP increases with that case because you're spending more on healthcare. Um, you think, well, wait, we really aren't better off from the year before because we started smoking, and this healthcare, it's not clear we actually have a disease, even though we're paying more for the healthcare. It's not clear we're better off yet. GDP actually increases, and that's some of the paradoxes of GDP. Way we calculate these things, it's actually an imperfect measure of how well off we are. We'll often use it as an approximation for how well off we are, but it's not perfect. Okay, and that's an example. Okay, consider number 4. Consider this simplified sequence. A farmer, darn it, I'm sorry. Farmer starts with a unit of wheat and sells it to a miller for 20 cents, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So farmer starts with a unit of wheat. So starts with so farmer starts with a zero. Assume he paid $0 for that unit of wheat, and then he sells it 0 cents, and he sells it for 20 cents to the miller. The miller gets the 20 cents, is paid 20 cents for that unit of wheat, grinds it into flour, sells it for 50 cents to the baker for 50 cents. So the baker pays 50 cents for that unit of flour and then converts it into a loaf of bread and sells it to a grocer for $2, but I'm going to call it 200 cents. And then grocer takes that loaf of bread, buys it for 200 cents, and sells it for 335. Okay. Question asks, how much does GDP increase? The second, what is the total value added by all these stages? I'm going to do the second question first. What's the total value? So value added equals 20 cents in the first stage. The second stage is 50 minus 20, 30 cents. Third stage, 200 minus 50, 150 cents. Third stage, 335 minus 200, 135 cents. What's the total value added? It's the sum of all that. And I told you, it turns out the value, if every step is produced in the same year, the sum of the value added is going to have to equal the final price. So that means the sum of this has got to equal 335 cents. And hopefully I've done the math right. Okay, I'm pretty sure I did. Okay. The question asked, that was the second question. The first one was by how much does GDP increase? Okay, 2 ways to calculate it. Sum the value added, 335. The other way is just look at the price of the final product. So the product, once it's been sold to a consumer, it was 335, get the same number. So GDP increases by 335 cents, $3.35. Okay. Number 10. Okay. Sorry, this computer, it's not like a mirror. in my intuition it is, and I can't quite get that. Gosh, why can I get it? Number 10. Okay, there we are. That's the best I'm going to do. To be certain that you understand the relationship. You understand the relationship between nominal GDP, real GDP, and GDP inflator. Fill in the following table. Okay. So number one, so it says nominal GDP, real GDP, and then GDP inflator. GDP deflator. Okay, so number one we have is 40 billion. Real GDP is 4,000 billion. And then it asks what's the GDP inflator. I'm just going to call it X. Okay, so we're going to need to do basically some ninth grade math to calculate this, and we're going to have to remember the formula. Real GDP equals nominal GDP divided by GDP deflator. Okay. So when we do that, we know that 4,400 equals real GDP is 4,000. 4,000 equals 4,400 divided by X. Okay. Hopefully, I can't even remember the names of the rules, but from ninth grade math, this means that X has to equal 4,400 divided by 4,000. Okay. I'm not going to give you a calculator for the exam, but hopefully this, I think, is easy enough that you should be able to get this on exam. How to simplify that? Well, the zeros cancel out. So you get 44 divided by 40. Let's divide numerator and denominator by 4. That would give you 11 tenths. So X just equals 1.1. Okay, so that'd be the answer for part 1, 1.1. Okay, question 2, it says, nominal GDP is 5,600, real GDP is X, GDP inflator is 140. So let's put that in there. So to it, I will do this in green for number 2. So 5,600 billion, X, and then GDP deflator was 140. So now you have to remember this formula. Real GDP equals that. So that means when we use the new numbers for part 2, we get X equals 5,600 divided by 140. Okay, let's simplify that. The zeros cancel. 560 divided by 14. I can't remember the rule from ninth grade math, but we can divide numerator and denominator both by 2. We're going to get 280 divided by 7. Let's divide numerator denominator by 7. That's going to give us 28 divided by 7, 40 divided by 1. Okay, X equals 40 in this case. Okay, it's a little bit harder. I don't know if you don't have a calculator. This is a little tough. If I gave this one with numbers like this, I'd probably do something like hint. 5,600 divided by 140 equals 40. I'll tell you that. Then I would also tell you 140 divided by 5,600 equals something else. 5,600 plus 140 equals this. 5,600 minus 140 equals something else. So I would give you those answers. So all you have to do is if I've given you all those things, you can say, well, I know it's going to come down. X equals 5,600 divided by 140. He's given me, the professor has given me on the exam that equals 40, so 40 is the answer. And I try to trip you up with those other things. So, but this way you wouldn't need a calculator if I gave you those hints. Okay, final one, part C. I'll do this one in red. Nominal GDP is not given. Here, I'll show you. Nominal GDP is not given. Real GDP is 4,400. Real GDP is 4,400. GDP inflator is 160. And let's see if I can do this. Without a calculator. Let's see. So we know that real GDP 4,400 equals X divided by 160. So X just equals 4,400 times 160. Let's see if I can do this. 4,400 times I'm just going to multiply it by 16. Then I know I got to add a 0 at the end. So we get 6, 0, 0, 4. Carry the 2, 26. I think I've done this right. 4,400, 0, 0, 4, 0, 1, 70. Add another 0. So we get 704,000. Okay. To what? Let's check, see if I actually did this right. Again, with this thing, I would, if this were a question on the exam, I would tell you things like 4,400 times 160 equals the following. 160. Yep, I was right. I did the arithmetic right. 704,000. Okay, but again, this arithmetic's a little bit harder than I'd actually ask you on an exam. But the key is you got to memorize this formula. Okay. You got to be able to do some ninth grade math too. Okay, so if you don't remember that, I'm sorry. Economics is just not for you. You have to be able to do at least some basic high school math to do a large part of, or a big chunk of some economics. Okay, so those are the questions from chapter 13. As I said, I'll continue chapter 13 in session 21, including I'll do some more problems and explain some more aspects from the text of the chapter. So in a few days, I will see you then in session 21.